On the northwest coast of Africa lies the world's largest and most populous non-self-governing territory. This is Western Sahara, and it's one of the biggest land disputes in modern times. To understand this dispute, we have to go back in time a little bit. Morocco achieved its independence from France in 1956. At that time, Spain had control over a lot of land nearby that they were calling Spanish Sahara and Spanish Morocco. Morocco claimed all of those lands, and over the next few years got all of Spanish Morocco, seen here in pink on the map. Spain held on to two of its northern coastal cities, Ceuta, seen here, and if we zoom out, and Spain also held on to the city of Melilla, seen here. But Morocco still claimed all of Spanish Sahara, now called Western Sahara, and Mauritania to the south laid claim to the same land. Decolonization eventually became inevitable, and the Spanish began withdrawing from the land in 1975. With the understanding that Morocco would take the northern two-thirds of Western Sahara and Mauritania the rest. It was a bad decision. The native Sahrawi people weren't represented in the negotiations at all. Essentially, the agreement was Spain, an old colonizer, dividing its African land between two new colonizers. The legality of this arrangement was brought before the International Court of Justice at the United Nations to give a non-binding advisory opinion. The UN defended the right of self-determination of the existing settlers and said that neither Morocco nor Mauritania had any legal right to the land or its resources. But the agreement with Spain was good enough for Morocco and Mauritania to ignore the UN's non-binding opinion. Land is land. Morocco's eastern neighbor, Algeria, tried to sabotage Spain's peace settlement and began supporting the Polisario Front, a growing liberation movement of Sahrawi people fighting for the right of self-determination.
250 Moroccan soldiers, 8 trucks, a jeep and 4 armored cars are caught in a wide gravel plain between two lines of hills. The guerrillas open up with their anti-tank guns. The fire is returned by the armored car.
The Polisario Front began waging guerrilla war against Morocco and Mauritania while the Spanish pulled out, starting a war that ended up dragging on for almost 16 years. A few years later, in 1978, Mauritania's government suffered a military coup, and the new government soon made peace with the Polisario Front and recognized Western Sahara as a state. But as Mauritania withdrew, Moroccans swept down to seize the newly abandoned land and fight on. In the 1980s, in a plan to force a stalemate and hold on to their newly acquired territory, Morocco began building a long desert wall, the Berm, sometimes called the Moroccan Wall. The Berm runs from the south, about 4 kilometers from Mauritania, and runs roughly parallel to the coast, 200 kilometers inland. Let's take a look at a section of the wall. This is the border station between Morocco and Mauritania, and if we follow this wall to the coast, we can take a look at one of the little coastal forts. Let's zoom in on this one. And you can see that there's not much to it, just a few buildings surrounded by a wall that's about 2 meters tall. So back to the border station, and moving east, see if you can track the wall as we move. Did you find it? And see if you can find the wall and one of the little border forts. And let's zoom in on this one. Looks a little bit more involved. We see a bunch of different buildings. It's not really clear to me how many people live there, but anyway, zooming out, I want to take a look at another part of the berm right here, so let's just center ourselves on this little fort. It's not clear to me whether anyone is actually there. But anyway, let's track this berm to the southeast, and we're actually going into Mauritania's land right here. It's about 1 kilometer in, and it stretches for a while. There's another fort, looks like it's probably abandoned, and as we zoom out here, you can see that the berm stretches into Mauritania, and it goes on for a while. So let's take a look at another installation. This fort looks like it's occupied to me. You can only tell so much from satellite imagery, Google Earth, and anyway. And at another section of the wall, dipping into Mauritania again with another fort, looks occupied to me. Today, the total population of Western Sahara is a little under 600,000 in comparison to Morocco's 37 million. Of the 600,000 people living in Western Sahara, more than 2/3 are recent Moroccan settlers. Supposedly 1/4 of the current population are Moroccan soldiers defending the different desert outposts and forts along the berm. Alright, so we're centered around Samara now, and one of the little fun things about aerial photography, satellite imagery, is trying to find out what things are from a distance. So in this freeze frame, can you identify where the wall is? There's an installation. We'll zoom out again, and let's take a look at the very edge of the wall. The berm goes almost all the way to the border of Algeria. And let's just peep this fort for a sec. Anyway, zooming out, and let's track the wall north, all the way up to the border of Morocco. And we zoom out again, and then we see the 3 countries, Morocco, Algeria, and the territory of Western Sahara. This is Tindouf, Algeria. In 1975, the government in exile of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic encamped here, alongside tens of thousands of refugees. For almost 2 generations, the Sahrawi Republic has been run from Algeria. These camps subsist almost entirely on humanitarian aid. Less than 10 kilometers to the southwest of Tindouf sits another Sahrawi refugee camp at Rabouni. There are Sahrawis still living in small communities in Western Sahara beyond the sovereignty of Morocco, but they exist in isolated pockets. In 1991, the United Nations negotiated a ceasefire between Morocco and the government backed by the Polisario Front, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Since then, Morocco and the Sahrawis had been living in a tense peace. There had been efforts during that time to hold a referendum in Western Sahara to see whether the people there wanted independence or to become part of Morocco. But the Sahrawis there, who are outnumbered more than 2-1 by the Moroccans who came in 1975 or later, know that any referendum that lets Moroccans vote en masse will vote to join Morocco. After all, that was why Morocco encouraged settlers to Western Sahara in 1975 and beyond. They aimed to colonize it by force or else rig a referendum later. No referendum was ever held, and the region was simmering until November 14, 2020, when the Polisario Front is said to have declared war on Morocco down in Guerrilla, after they had already been blockading the border road for 3 weeks. In the days after, harassing fire and skirmishing have allegedly taken place at locations along the berm. 84 nations recognize the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, but in 2020, only 40 countries currently recognize them as the government of Western Sahara, as seen in green on this map. Countries seen in red have rescinded their recognition sometime over the last 40 years. The diplomatic tide has been turning against the Sahrawis. However, even though few countries recognize the Sahrawi Republic, no nation currently recognizes Morocco as the legitimate authority over Western Sahara. 0. But that may be changing. The war against Morocco is hopeless by any military means. The Polisario Front have only land forces and not more than several thousand soldiers altogether. It's not clear to me if this breach of the peace is a cry for help to the international community, some quixotic and doomed enterprise, or the agitations of some Sahrawi element that got impatient with everything, or something else altogether. This is an opportunity to de-escalate. Another ceasefire could be made. Morocco wants Western Sahara for several reasons. First, land is land, even if it's all barren desert. There's a fixed amount of land in the world, and getting it is a political win. It's just a bonus if it's recognized internationally. Second, owning the coastline would enlarge Morocco's territorial sea and exclusive economic zone, and might give them claims on the continental shelf. The waters are theirs to fish and explore for resources 200 nautical miles from the coastline. That's about 370 kilometers. Third, Morocco, through Western Sahara, sits on more than 70% of the entire world's phosphate reserves. Phosphate is a finite resource used to make fertilizer, and the price is expected to rise in the next 20 years as the coming global food crises become more serious. Much of these reserves are in Morocco proper, but many also lie in Western Sahara. Let's take a look at the phosphate mine at Bou Craa. This mine produces 10% of Morocco's total phosphate exports per year. Unfortunately, Google Earth Studio doesn't really give you enough of the contours of the Earth in remote areas like this, but you can get a pretty good picture of what it looks like on the ground in a place where there are no observers. And remember that this mine alone makes up 10% of Morocco's annual phosphate exports. The Kingdom of Morocco's been hoping that eventually their de facto control over the country will be seen as legitimate. In the last year, 10 nations have opened up consulates in Moroccan-controlled Western Sahara: Burundi, Gabon, Djibouti, São Tomé, Guinea, Liberia, and more. Geopolitical or economic necessity is convincing nations to lean to Morocco. For years, Morocco insisted that Western Sahara could be an autonomous region if they only submitted to Morocco's sovereignty. For years, the Polisario Front refused. The Sahrawi freedom fighters should pursue international support more vigorously and peacefully lobby for recognition. Restarting hostilities could precipitate the opposite of their goal and lose them their remaining friends. Morocco is likely to hold the line and wait decades for the Sahrawi Republic in exile to cave into their offer to become an autonomous region of Morocco. Unfortunately, this region seems to be sliding back into conflict instead. Thanks for watching this video. Most of the research is in the video description. I love playing around with maps like this, so let me know in the comments if you think there's an interesting place I should look at next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all the rest.
Behind 3 trucks and 35 men. A handful of guerrillas move off their hilltop positions, intent on capturing the trucks. They get to within 100 yards of the Moroccans before they're seen. Under intense fire, 12 guerrillas move into the attack. As they advance, the 25 Moroccan defenders abandon the trucks and retreat into a gully. The guerrillas close in until they're shooting it out at a range of 15 yards. A guerrilla races through the storm of fire, leaps into one of the Moroccan trucks and drives it out. A moment later, a second truck is taken. Having got what they came for, the guerrillas shout to the Moroccans to surrender. In doing so, a man is killed.